thanks for being a part of the conversation this evening. I'm Pastor John Wertz. I'm one of the assistants to the bishop and the director for Evangelical Mission. And I'm happy to be here with you to talk a little bit tonight about just enough structure to be helpful is what I'm calling this. So I'm going to throw a slide up on the screen for just a second, and then we'll come back to the big group for everybody to see. Part of what inspired me to want to have this conversation tonight is really this idea that folks wear a lot of hats in most of our congregations today. You can tell that I have been to many various baseball games across the years and bought the little ice cream helmets, with a little thing that you can. And so this is my stack of them. And so my question for you all really to get us started is, when you think about your life and your ministry of the congregation, how many hats do you wear? How many different leadership roles do you find yourself undertaking at any given point in the life of the congregation?
Too many.
Too many. All right.
Linda likes that.
Well, because I can identify with it. That's why I like it.
Sure.
You keep from doing that.
Yeah.
The other thing
Usually one job gets added on to another. You don't lose any.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
And your hats change over time as well.
Right.
So
Right. And to Patty's point, sometimes you add a hat and then you think you're taking one off, and then you don't. you still have those hats. Yeah. Anybody else?
We just had a social ministry meeting today. Actually, my wife's more involved than I, but I was listening in on it. And one of the things that is an issue now, because of so many people don't come to church. I mean, they may log in, they may, whatever, but it's hard to get volunteers to fill these hats.
Right.
And, there's a couple hats that some of us have been carrying around for 18 to 20 years, and it's time limited. And it's about that time for many of us.
Right. No, that's absolutely true. I mean, in so many contexts and so many settings, whether you're inside a congregational setting or even in community organizations, people find themselves filling roles for longer than they thought they would. And some folks continue on out of a sense of duty and obligation. Some folks continue on because they're passionate and they think, boy, if I step back from this, what's going to happen for the ministry? What I'm convinced of is that we've reached a point, though, where maybe we've created more structure in some of our contexts for ourselves than we absolutely have to have. And so to that sense, I pose this question, how do we balance what's required by law and what's required by the ELCA model constitution and by your own constitutions? How do we balance that with what's actually practical and what's actually helpful? And so that's really where we're going to go this evening, is to try to work through and talk about this question and talk about some tips and strategies for how we can strike this balance between what is and what needs to be. To that end, when you think about the way that congregations are structured, in reality, there's lots of ways that we can organize ourselves. Some of our congregations these days are now incorporated in Virginia. Some of them have trustees. That's an option that didn't used to be an option. And so when you do, you can organize yourself that way. And the difference, just for the sake of so the sort of practical difference there is shows up if you're trying to do something with property. So if you are trying to either sell a piece of property or build something and take out a loan, if you have trustees, then the congregation will take a vote, but ultimately the trustees are the ones who have to sign all the documents. And in some places in Virginia, you also have to go and take some of that information to the court. I say some places because this gets really inconsistent in my experience in different parts of the state about how things have to get filed or don't have to get filed. If you're incorporated and say you want to take out a loan to build a building, then you congregation takes their vote, and then the council president signs on behalf of the congregation on the document. So that's an example of different ways that we get organized. We have different congregations have different ways to elect council leaders. So like, for example, somebody just, we don't need everybody, but if somebody's willing to share, tell me how you elect your council president.
Council president is elected by the members of the council.
Okay.
Ours too.
All right.
Ours as well. Yeah.
Right. So that's pretty standard, but there are some congregations where the council president, the vice president, and the treasurer are elected by the congregation as a part of the election cycle. I know of one congregation where they elect members to council by essentially the same way we elect a bishop. Everybody in the congregation who's a voting member is eligible. They have a series of votes over a series of weeks. You vote for the three, if you're electing three, you vote for the three people you feel like should be serving on council next. That's, they have the first week, they have a nominating ballot. Then people have a chance to take their names off if they want to. The next week you have an electing ballot, and if you have ties, you have to go to a third week.
The basket of junk.
It's
to the right.
It's a lot. But that's a way that I know at least one congregation does. I heard a story, I've not experienced this, but I heard a story about a congregation where they basically elected people by lot, that they got a group of people who were willing to serve. They had somebody they picked scripture passages for each of those people. They had somebody put that page in a Bible. They mixed the Bibles up, they put them on the altar, and then somebody else who wasn't a part went up there and pulled ones off. And if you got pulled, you got elected to council.
Oh my goodness.
Never heard of that before.
Like I said, I haven't seen that one in person, but I was told that happened. So we'll see.
Yeah.
And then when we think about the ways that we organize ourselves, we have formal and then we have informal structures. So we all know that in the life of a congregation, we have things that we officially vote on, and then things that if the right group of people agrees to, it's going to happen, for right or for wrong. We just know that. So when we think about crafting a structure, we got to keep all these things in mind. And I bring up all those possibilities to say, you as a congregation really have some control on how you organize yourself. And really, how you organize yourself needs to have something to do with the ministry that you want to accomplish. Now, I do know, and we were talking about constitutions before we started. So these next 4 slides I'm going to show you are constitutional language. I don't know that I could create more boring PowerPoint slides in my life, but these are helpful things for us to look at for just a second. So there is a model constitution for congregations within the ELCA. That model constitution has things that are provisions that have, some of them have asterisks, Some of them don't have asterisks. The one that we're going to talk about here in a second, C1204, does not have an asterisk. The ones that have asterisks are ones that everybody is expected to adopt and include in their constitution. The ones that do not have asterisks are things that you can adjust to fit the local conditions of your life and ministry. And the reason we said, we were saying, some of us who were on a little early, the reason we were saying, if you're thinking about redoing or updating your constitution, but you haven't started, it's worth waiting until after August, because invariably there will be some new asterisk things that get updated in the churchwide assembly that happens in August of this year. So I wanted to show you just a couple of provisions here. I just realized I misspelled Constitution. Sorry about that, y'all. It's going to show up on all the slides. So anyway, couple of provisions here that apply to how we think about our structure. So C1204. Now, again, this is the model Constitution. So depending on how old your Constitution is, how often you've made updates, you may not have this exact language, and you may not have it as C1204, but this is the rough language that we're working with now. And it speaks to the Congregational Council. The council shall have general oversight of the life and activities of this congregation, in particular its worship life, to the end that everything be done in accordance with the Word of God, the faith and practice of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. The duties of the Congregation Council shall include the following. And I've just got the first three: to lead this congregation in stating its mission, to do long-range planning, to set goals and priorities, to evaluate its activities in light of its mission and goals, to seek to involve all members of this congregation in worship, learning, witness, service, and support. And then here's the one I want you to pay attention to, particularly: to oversee and provide for the administration of this congregation, to enable it to fulfill its function and to perform its mission. Okay. So let's go on to the next one. So the next one I want us to look at is the 13s. So this whole C13 section includes a list of potential committees: executive, nominating, audit, mutual ministry, and call committee. Again, those can be adjusted depending on how your constitution is put together. But then you get 1306 and 1307. Other committees of this congregation may be formed as the need arises by decision of the Congregation Council. And then it says, duties of the committees shall be specified in bylaws or continuing resolutions. These are choices. Okay. All right. So keep going. We're getting close. I promise there's only 4 of these, and then I'll break them down. All right. So now we're on to C16.04. And here's the first one you see that's an asterisk that we have to include. Specifically, this is about amendments. And it says, this constitution may be amended to bring it into conformity. Such amendments may be approved by a majority vote of those voting members present and voting at any legally called meeting of this congregation. So this is the asterisks. You can update all of your asterisks with one vote. And then there's a whole process if you need to update your constitution with things that aren't asterisked. All right. So one more, promise, and then we're going to get away. We're going to break down some of this language. Then there's 1702. Bylaws may be adopted or amended at any legally called meeting of this congregation with a quorum present by a 2/3 vote of those voting members present and voting. All right. And then C 1802. continuing resolution shall be enacted or amended by a majority vote of a meeting of this congregation, or, and this is really helpful, a 2/3 vote of all voting members of the congregation council. All right, so let me stop sharing, and I'll break down why I shared those specific things with you. I am firmly convinced that our model constitution was developed and is intended for a congregation that worships 300 on a Sunday morning and has 500 to 600 people regularly participating. It was not developed for the average ELCA congregation, and in general, an average congregation, which in a pre-pandemic world had 60 to 65 people worshiping on a Sunday morning and 100 to 120 people actively participating. I go back to that picture of the hats. The Constitution, as it's structured, if you do everything, and if we follow a tendency we've had in the past to create committees for everything, then we create a situation in many congregations where, and Martin, I'm going to pick on you for a second, where Martin puts on his hat as the council president. And then when the congregational meeting is over, now Martin's now the worship leader. Anyway, sorry, Martin, I'm going back to when you were going back to when Martin was the council president, right? He takes off his council president hat. He puts on his property committee hat and has another meeting with the exact same people, and they call it the property committee. And then something else will happen. He takes off that hat and he has another meeting with pretty much the same people, and that's the worship committee. And so we create this structure where we're burdening folks, again, my opinion, we're burdening folks with committees, and we're burdening folks with structures that we don't have to have. And that's why I showed you the constitutional provisions, because I am firmly convinced, oh, sorry, wrong one. I'm firmly convinced that nobody joins a church to be on a committee.
I agree. I can see that. Yeah.
Right? Nobody's ever joined a church to be on a committee. We have joined a church because we found the love and grace of God. We've joined a church because it is a place where we connect with other Christians. We've joined a church because we've heard God's word proclaimed in powerful ways. We've seen ministry accomplished in extraordinary ways. We do not join a church to be on a committee. And I go back to a church, I'll tell this way. I arrived at St. Michael in Blacksburg to be the new pastor there. I arrived in April. In the end of April, we had a meeting. It was called Committee Night. Some of you may remember committee nights that used to happen. It was a very popular idea in the 80s and early 90s. And I was quite frankly surprised. I didn't know many churches were still doing committee night. But I was sure, if this is the way we're structured, fantastic, I'll do it. And so I showed up to that first meeting, and there were like 45 people there. I mean, they had committee groups everywhere, and they were all meeting. And I thought, wow, okay, this was not what I expected. This is fantastic. This is great. So we did that, rolled around in May, time for committee night. I got there expecting to see the 45 people for the 7 committees or however many there were. And there were 9 people who came. And that's when I realized something. I realized that everybody had come the first time because they wanted to meet the new pastor and see what the new pastor was about. And I also realized that in Blacksburg, it's kind of pointless to plan a meeting that week after graduation because everybody in town exhales and nobody wants to go to a meeting. But that night I had a conversation with one of the committee chairs that has stuck with me ever since, that I think that speaks to my understanding of structure. The person walked into my office after this meeting, terribly frustrated, said, "Pastor, I'm so frustrated. Nobody showed up for the meeting tonight." I said, "Yeah, well, I'm really sorry. What do you think's going on?" And the person said, "Well, I mean, when I call them and let them know that we have actual business to accomplish, they show up. But they won't just come to the meeting because they're supposed to come to the meeting when we don't have anything we have to do." Yeah, think about that for a second. And I said, "Well, maybe we shouldn't have the meeting. Maybe we should only have a meeting when we have something we actually need to do." And lo and behold, over time, that's what we ended up doing, was creating a structure that didn't have meetings simply for the sake of having meetings, but tried to have meetings that allowed people to put their gifts into action, to make choices and decisions that mattered, and to do something to live out their faith and to support the congregation that they love, because everybody there loved the congregation. What they didn't love was sitting in a meeting that didn't accomplish anything. And so that's why I shared these constitutional provisions with you. And I'm going to show you, let me put one of them back up. All right, so let me reshare that screen. So this section about committees says, other committees may be formed as the need arises by the decision of the council. It does not say other committees must be formed. It does not say you have to have a committee for everything you want to do. It does not say you have to create pages and pages of job descriptions and structures in the Constitution. It says you may do that. And if you do that, then there's a place that you can put these things in the bylaws or in the continuing resolutions. Now, this is important to think about because I met with a congregation a few weeks ago, and they shared with me their 14 pages of bylaws that detailed their committee structure. Very specific things, like the times during the year when they were supposed to have this particular event and that particular event. Anybody want to guess how many folks were regularly worshiping in a part of that congregation? Just pick a number.
20.
20, we got a 20. Anybody else want to guess?
35.
35. All right, anybody else?
I was
I'll
gonna say
go
about
high,
60.
50.
We got 60, we got a 50, 30. We had 30 people there were 13 committees and 14 pages worth of descriptions for what they were supposed to do on those committees.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And it created this situation where, and these are wonderfully faithful people, and they cared about their congregation and their structure, and they were feeling burdened and overwhelmed by trying to live up to all of these things. And the question was essentially, gosh, how do we narrow this down? What do we do? And I said, well, if it was me, I'd have a congregational meeting and I would vote to dissolve all of the bylaws.
Excellent. I like that.
Not because there weren't things in there that they did, because there were, but they were creating a situation where they either had to overwhelm themselves with serving 30 people serving on all these different committees, or they were finding themselves in the position of feeling guilty for not doing these things that they thought they had to do, that they had created for themselves. And so what I said was, I would have a meeting and I would dissolve all of the bylaws and then recreate continuing resolutions if you want.
Yeah.
They don't have to be as extensive as what you said. You know, you could say, if we want a worship committee, you could put in the continuing resolutions, the worship committee will oversee the worship ministry of this congregation. Done. It's described.
Yeah.
And the value of doing this as a continuing resolution, as opposed to a bylaw, shows up again when you look at this part of the model constitution. You can, if you have a continuing resolution, you can change that by a 2/3 vote of your council.
Yep.
If you decide, hey, this isn't working, this committee needs to change focus, or this committee needs to go away, then that's a council vote, not a congregational vote. And there are places for bylaws that work very well, and some things do need to be in bylaws. But when you put a bylaw in, then you're really locking yourself into something that really needs to be something that you feel sure about, that's going to need to last for a little while, because you're obligating yourself to it unless you have a congregational meeting and a 2/3 vote at that meeting is the only way you're going to change it. So from a flexibility standpoint, in this world where things are changing pretty fast, not locking yourself into a constitutional structure that requires a congregational vote just gives you way more flexibility as a congregation to adapt and to change and to say, you know, here, I'll go back to this 14-page set of bylaws for a second. Well, one of the activities, if I remember this correctly, one of the activities that was described in the, it wasn't hospitality, but it was something like that was the name of the committee, like hospitality or congregational life or something. One of the activities that was described that they had to accomplish each October was an Oktoberfest.
Oh, no.
Right, so that's a constitutional requirement
Holy smokes.
that they created for themselves. Well, what do you do with that in COVID? They didn't do it, right? Guess what? They didn't do it. So now we have people feeling guilty. The Constitution says we're supposed to do this, as opposed to saying, boy, we need to change our idea of what congregational life is going to be doing in a world where getting together in person is not happening in quite the same way. So when you think about, so this is why I think just enough structure to be helpful, while I titled it this, is that these are tools for us to use to try to organize in a way that allows us to do the ministry God is calling us to do. And we can use them in a way that either locks us into things or that gives us the flexibility to adapt to what needs to happen. And again, all of these things are perfectly legal within the Constitution. We're not skirting anything. We're not avoiding anything. We're not bending or tweaking rules. These are the actual rules. And the reason I included that piece about the council, so let me back up to that one and show it again. The reason I showed you that first C12 provision is because what I said to those folks was, if you dissolve all of your existing bylaws to create something new, You don't have to rush to create something new. Take your time, because as soon as you dissolve those bylaws, then C-1204C comes into effect. The council has the responsibility to oversee and provide for the administration of this congregation and to enable it to fulfill its functions and perform its mission. Once they dissolved all those things, then the council had the authority, and now the council can do the work it needs to do to figure out what's the actual structure we should have. So again, everybody's constitution is going to be a little different. So the wording in yours, you're going to have to look at yours to see how your wording is if you want to do some of these things. But the structure is there to give you the space to do it in a way that makes the most sense for you. Because again, in my way of thinking, nobody joins a congregation to join a committee. And if if we've locked ourselves into 17 committees, then we're not even going to hardly have time to have a prayer. And we certainly aren't going to have the ability to respond to the things that are happening and do the ministry possibilities that might arise. Right? So I've got some possibilities for what the structure might look like. We'll talk about next for other ways to structure things. But I want to stop there and just answer questions and see what folks want to talk about, or if there are any specifics from your situation you want to that might be helpful for the group.
John, I have one question, and that is, if you do away the bylaws and then you go ahead and do continuing resolutions, does that eventually have to get approved by the Virginia Senate Council?
Yeah, no. Once you've got those continuing resolutions are yours, and those you don't have to send back to the Synod for approval.
Okay.
Those are just yours to deal with.
But the bylaw change would?
Yeah, you'd want to send a bylaw in just to have that on record. But it is Skip Zubrod, and I'll have his information at the end if you don't have it. Skip is our constitutional expert, and Skip's the one who will help you out with some of those things. And the reason, and just some folks like, why do I need to send this to the Synod? So the bylaw piece, if you're dissolving, if all you've got in your bylaws are council descriptions, you're sending that to Skip, no problem. He'll say, great, thank you for the updated version. And we'll put that in our records just in case you ever are looking for it and can't find it. The reason we ask for updates to come for review is because sometimes we have really well-intentioned ideas and they actually create conflicts within your own constitution. And so it's our job, it's Skip's, because Skip's the one who reads all this stuff. It's Skip's job to flag those things and try to help you think them through. And so let me give you an example of one that's appeared in this COVID time. We have a congregation that wanted to create the ability for people to vote by mail. So they wanted absentee ballots, which constitutions don't typically permit. And their reasoning was wonderful and sound. And they were telling me that they were going to do this. And I said, well, okay, but the reason we don't have absentee ballots is because you have to give people the ability to amend a motion from the floor. And so if you can amend a motion from the floor, then it's entirely possible that what someone voted on before that meeting no longer exists. The motion as they had it, where you sent it to them, and we'll use a congregational spending plan. if you mail out, hey, this is our plan for the coming year, check yes, no if you approve, and send it back in. Well, that's fine until you have the actual meeting, at which point somebody says, well, you know what, we really need to add $1,000 to this for more youth ministry. Well, at that point, the person's vote is invalid because you've changed what they're voting on. And so we ask folks to share their constitutions with us so that we can help you flag things like that and think through solutions. And in this case, the solution for them was, well, you could have people present from home on a Zoom meeting. You could have your meeting in the room, and you could have a screen like this so that people could hear what was going on, have the ability to participate, and then vote at an appropriate time. So that's why we asked for revisions to come to the Synod, so that we can help make sure you're not walking yourself accidentally into a corner, because most people don't do this every day. And we got great ideas, and you just sometimes create things that there's unintended consequences we never thought of. So, all right.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Okay. Other questions, things folks want to touch on at this point?
Question, but it really doesn't have to do with the matter. You're recording this.
Yes.
Where would I go? I think some of my fellow council members might be interested in hearing this. Where would I send them to find this? If this is an appropriate place, you can answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. Pastor Colleen is going to edit these things on Sunday. And then once she finishes editing them, they will be posted on Power in the Spirit website on the Synod webpage. And so just a minute, we get a second, I will, when I pull my PowerPoint down, I'll grab that link and put it in the chat so you'll have it. But we will also publish it in the weekly email newsletter that goes out. And Pastor Drebus should have that in the email that goes out tomorrow morning of where the link is that you can find those things. And it'll just stay posted up there for folks to reference.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So if I'm saying we need to think about structuring in a way that is helpful to the ministry we're doing. One step is to clean up the stuff that we have required ourselves to do. That's what we were just talking about. And then the other step for me is to think about how do we create systems that allow people to do what they're called to do without, as Dave described, without creating a situation where somebody has to wear the same hat for 18 years and gets to the point of being burned out or incapable of being able to do what they're being asked to do anymore. So I've got three possibilities I want to share with you. I'll run through them so you can see them, and then I'll pull the slide down so we can talk. So one possibility I want to put in front of you is what I call project-based organizing. And this to me is the idea of finding a short-term team of passionate people who are going to accomplish a task. And let me give you an example. So instead of having a worship committee who feels like they have to meet every month, what if we had an Advent and Christmas team? People who are super passionate about Advent and Christmas. Let me stop sharing so you can see each other. People who are super passionate about Advent and Christmas, who get together in September and have a series of questions and things to work through, to think about what we want to do to plan for a fantastic faith-filled Advent, Christmas, and maybe Epiphany. They meet on a Sunday afternoon. You get anybody who's interested. Now, that's not we're just going to have an open call. Anybody who wants to show up, and we don't do any recruiting. Yeah, certainly anybody can show up, but we also talk to some people who've expressed an interest in Christmas and Easter, people who are maybe a part of a choir or a musician or have gifts to decorate. We invite those people in, and then we open it up to others. And in that meeting, you walk through and talk about, well, what are the things that make Christmas or Advent, Christmas, and Epiphany really special at this congregation that we want to make sure we continue? What are the opportunities we have to do something new this year to welcome people into our space and into our ministry? What's one way we can help somebody have a joy-filled Christmas? We ask those kind of questions. We do some planning, and then we assign people to follow up on those particular things. And they may create their own project team to do that one particular thing they've been asked to do. But what we don't do with this group is say, now we need you to meet again next week and next week and next week until we get to Christmas. What we say at the end of this meeting is, everybody has their assignments. Everybody feels good? Okay. We trust you to get them done. Thank you for your help. And you turn people loose to do what you've asked them to do. We don't keep having meetings every month to think about Christmas, Advent, Christmas, and Epiphany. So that's one example. Another example of something like this might be Vacation Bible School. Maybe we don't have a regular standing group of people who get together to talk about faith formation, but we love Vacation Bible School, and we do it every year. And so if Vacation Bible School happens in June, then in April, we gather the 4 or 5 people who have the most fun with this. We talk about it. We get our plan ready. We turn them loose, and off they go. We're not having an education meeting every month, at which point one of the things that might come up on that meeting is Vacation Bible School. So that's the concept of a project-based organizing approach. It's very short term. It appeals to people who want to get something done. And what we're finding in a lot of places is there are folks who would be happy to help you with a project who don't want to be on a standing team or committee. And we can say to them, you have to be on a committee, then they don't come at all. Or we can figure out how to organize ourselves in a way that allows them to use their gifts and that harnesses that energy to accomplish the ministry we feel called to accomplish. So that's one possibility. Another possibility, and you're probably familiar with, is to talk about an ad hoc committee. These things usually last a little longer. They're accomplishing a specific task, but usually it's a more complicated task. So if we needed to put a new roof on the sanctuary, we might appoint an ad hoc committee to deal with the roof issue. They may end up meeting 3, 4, 5, 6 times before the roof gets put on the building. But they know once there's a new roof on the building, their job is done. So it has a clear, definitive ending date. That one, that approach has been around a long time. Lots of folks use it. We might have an actual committee. This is a standing group with clear responsibilities, with specific goals and responsibilities. The example of this that most congregations have is a council. Your council has very specific jobs that they're supposed to accomplish. They have a set time frame that they're supposed to work within. They have clear rules about how long people can serve and how often folks rotate in and off, on and off. And there are some things for which we absolutely need a group like that, a committee, to continue to do this continuous work. My thought is we pick those pretty carefully. We got to think about, do we really need this to be a standing committee that meets every time? Or is there another structure that works? And so a council, a mutual ministry team, or mutual ministry committee, those are things that are standing. You might have an audit committee or a finance committee. You might not. That might be something that works in one of these other ways. There's probably others approaches to organizing the way people work, but those are three of the main ones that I'm aware of and that I've used in working with congregations. So let me stop there and see if there's questions folks want to follow up on any of those three.
John, the only thing I would add is on that first one where you said the short term.
Right.
We sort of did that with the Blacksburg Fellowship with Vacation Bible School. So
Yeah.
we had different churches.
Yeah.
And we opened it up to everybody. And so that worked really good.
Mm-hmm.
It really did. And so you don't have to only rely on your own church. You can rely on other churches. So
That's right.
It's a way to open up. It's a way to open up for everybody.
Absolutely. And what, particularly when we're doing something collaborative across congregations, that approach is super helpful.
Yep.
I also think that what you will find, and every community is different, but in a number of communities, if you tell the story of the ministry you're doing, and you're doing a ministry where people can see the line between what they're doing and the ministry being accomplished, there are some folks who don't worship with you on a regular basis who would be willing to help with the project. They'll show up and help with the project, but they're not ever going to serve on a committee. And so opening that up gives you some more people and some more possibilities. Certainly, if we get people engaged in ministry, the spillover effect of that may well be that they ask you more questions about the worship life of the congregation and who Jesus is. But the approach is just to make space for people to share their gifts and use them in a way that impacts the world and helps respond to God's love for us. All right, so if we think about those as possibilities, then there's a question, okay, well, if I've got project-based organizing happening here, I've got an ad hoc committee here, I've got a committee going over here, well, how do they all relate to each other, and how do they relate to council, and how do those things work? So there's probably lots of other choices, but these are the three that really come to mind for me. You can have a hierarchical structure. I mean, that's a pretty standard org chart approach that's been a part of congregations and businesses going back forever and a day, at least until Henry Ford. And that's where you have real clear lines of reporting and representation, and often that manifests itself with a conversation in council that says, all right, so who's going to be the council liaison to the worship committee? Who's going to be again, sometimes we end up with the same person being the quote council liaison to 5 different things because there's only so many people. But that hierarchical structure becomes more practical the bigger the organization gets, because it's harder to communicate as you get bigger. You need some clear lines of how this conversation happens. let me drop to the bottom one. I'll go to the middle one last. The bottom one is a very flat structure. So this is super popular in business settings at the moment, or the last however many years. That idea is that you have as much as possible, the people who are doing the activity are making the decisions. And so, for example, if we said as a congregation that we are going to spend $500 on Vacation Bible School, then the people who have taken on the task of leading Vacation Bible School have free and clear authority to spend that $500. They don't have to go back to the council for approval. They don't have to ask another committee to approve. The people doing the work have the authority to spend the money. And they have the authority to decide, well, you know what, this year we're going to add a service project. And they don't need to go ask two more groups above them if it's okay to have a service project, which sometimes happens in hierarchical structures. I certainly have known of congregations where people were trying to do that and they had to wait to go back to the council, have another council meeting to get an approval, to then go back to your education committee to then tell the Vacation Bible School people that it's okay to do a service project with Vacation Bible School. So that flat structure, super helpful in a lot of ways. It promotes and requires trust among the people who are involved. It requires folks to give authority to other people, to give the keys, so to speak, to other people. And when it works well, when there's trust involved, things move a lot faster and you can be a lot more adaptable in how you respond. The middle one here, I'm calling a spoke and wheel structure. This happens, I think, unintentionally in a lot of congregations. But I think you can also do it in an intentional way. And so the way this works is you have a leader. Sometimes it's a pastor or a deacon. Sometimes it's a couple of people in the congregation. You have a leader who's kind of in the middle of the hub, who's checking in with all these people doing all these other ministries and activities. We're not having a ton of meetings about these things necessarily, but that person in the middle, or people in the middle, could be counsel too, are saying, for example, hey, we're getting towards, it's February, we need to start thinking about who's going to gather together the Vacation Bible School team. And this group in the middle asks somebody to gather together the Vacation Bible School team. And they're the ones who say, hey, we need to have an audit done. Who are our audit people? And they reach out to those folks and have the audit people get started. And in that sense, it's not top down where this person has to report to this person to get something done. It's lots of reminders going out. It's very relational. It's very much of a remembering who does what and hearing what people are excited about and then encouraging them to take on a role. It takes some people in the middle who are good at keeping things organized. The real positive there in that approach is it's very relational. The real negative in that approach is that if you lose the person in the middle, or people in the middle, it takes some work to put somebody back in there and keep things going. The real negative of the hierarchical piece is that it can be very restricting and people can't get things done. It takes too long to actually adapt to things that are changing super fast. The real negative of the flat, yeah, Patty, I'll get you just a second. The real negative of the flat structure is there's got to be a lot of trust involved, because there's room for somebody to just head off in a whole direction that maybe other folks didn't expect, right? But it gives people agency and authority. So those are the ups and downs of those three approaches. Go ahead, Patty.
I just wanted to know how you keep people from deciding the pastor should be the center of the wheel.
Right. I mean, and that's, and I will speak as one who's guilty of being the center of the wheel at times, when I was at St. Michael. I think the way that you keep that from being, some of it, in some cases, the pastor's always going to be part of that center. It's not going to, it can't happen. But what you need is a group of leaders, and you need a pastor who's willing and able, and that able part is the hard part. I will speak for myself, to say, hey, we need 3 or 4 people doing this, not one person, and to keep constantly bringing new people into the loop. Because when I look back at my own ministry, the place where it was too much of me in the middle was when I'd been in ministry in one place a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a group, and then things would change and things change. And I made the mistake of not seeing, oh, hey, wait, I've got to get the next person to join me in this piece. You know, we were busy, things were going, it was easier, you know, all the things that you do when you let that stuff happen. And so it takes, I think it takes some intentionality to say, and this is why I was saying, I think it happens and we don't name it. And I think if we name it, then that helps the council to say, okay, yes, this is the way we structure. Now, who's going to be, what are our 4 parts that make up the center, and how do we keep rotating people into those parts? Other.
Thanks.
Sure.
Because I mean, it's a default.
It is. Absolutely is. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody. And so one of these things for me about looking back, you know, when you get a step away and you sort of look back at where you've been and what you've done, one of the things for me is to say, yeah, there's value in that approach because it is so relational. But you got to make sure there's multiple people doing the stuff. And it's hard. It's really hard. Other questions?
Well, I would say probably at our church, Our Savior in Warrenton, we try, it's almost a hybrid approach, but for instance, we do have 4 major groups, you know, worship, community service, et cetera,
right?
And we give each one of those a certain degree of budget.
Right.
You know, when we do the budget, we say, okay, these are, if you give us all the things that you want to do, it adds up to this much, you're in charge of that.
Yep.
We have also told all of them that if you see something that, you know, you need more money, you can go to another committee or another group and say, can we have part of your budget to do this?
Sure.
And if they do that, that's supposed to be fine with council. I'm not sure that it always works.
Right.
And sometimes people don't want to do that because
right.
You know, but so we've tried to develop a sort of a hybrid that at times gets into all 3 of those versions.
Yeah, I think that's really, thank you for pointing that out, that these are, you know, examples, and then the reality of lived experience is all of these things get merged together in the fashion that makes the most sense in your context. And that's why I think I advocate for folks thinking in terms of how do we create the most flexibility for ourselves. That's why I say don't put your committee descriptions in the Constitution. You know, bylaws you can change with 1 vote. Constitutions take 2 votes. Continuing resolutions take 2/3 vote of the council. Now, the other part of that is there's another congregation I've worked with. They have 23 pages of continuing resolutions. And I said, really? Do we really need 23? Like, what would you do to do this? I was like, well, I'd cut it down to about a page. Oh, we need all these things. I was like, okay, fine. I mean, you work through them and figure them out. But the structure needs to serve the ministry. The ministry does not need to serve the structure. And at the point that the ministry is simply serving the structure, then we've gotten our priorities out of whack. Because what we want is just enough structure to be helpful, so that we have, when questions arise, we know what to do. When legal things come about elections and votes and all, we have good order for how we do this. But what we don't want to do is burden everybody with 1,000 sets of rules and regulations that you have to keep up with. And you spend so much time keeping up with them that you never actually get to doing the ministry you feel like God is calling you to do. All right, by my count, we've got about 4 minutes left before the Lene will magically move us all back to the main room, and then we can prepare for worship. So any final questions, ideas, things you want to talk about?
I just got a message that said 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's Lene's message to us. I was guessing. I was like looking at my clock.
Yep. To have trustees, what legality part do we have to do for that? I mean,
yeah,
get a new trustee, we have to go through a lawyer, or what's the deal on that?
Yeah, so this is where I put Skip's information up on the screen.
Okay. Yeah.
Say, if you don't have Skip's email address is a very helpful thing to have with some of these ideas. And I'll put it in the chat here in a second too. But no, you do, to appoint trustees, there is paperwork that has to be filled out, and it has to go through the courts, the local court.
Yeah. Okay.
And the specifics of how that gets done, yes, I'll refer you to Skip, because it's helpful. I believe I think you could probably do it yourself, but it's a whole lot easier with a lawyer involved.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, and to that end, I got 44 seconds. To that end, that's an important one to keep up with, because if you get down to one trustee and somebody dies, then you got a world of problems with the court trying to get things appointed and get things done legally. So, trying to keep at least 3 who are legally and properly appointed is a really helpful thing.
Yep, we're running into that. I appreciate that. I'll talk to you about that too later.
Yeah, perfect.
Before they take us away, thank you so much, John.
Thank you, John.
It's been very helpful.
And very good.
Anything I can do, let me know.
Thank you.
Okay.